Well, we're joined now by the leader of the UK Independence Party, Nigel Farage. Why do you object to this?
It's a funny old world, isn't it? We don't know to the nearest 2 million how many people live in the country, but we're about to electronically tag all of our sheep. Listen, the sheep industry has been through a dreadful period. There are many people out there, particularly upland sheep farmers, who are just earning a few £1,000s a year. I mean, they keep doing it because of tradition and because they want to maintain the land. So it's an industry that's been in big trouble. It does not need this extra cost and this extra bureaucracy right now. And it's a classic example of the European Commission decides how we're going to live our lives in this country, and the British government, which ought to be standing up and screaming and saying, look, the British sheep industry can't cope with this, we don't need this, and anyway, it's not actually appropriate. We've got the measures that we need if there's a crisis, but I haven't heard, frankly, anything from the British government on this.
I mean, talking about the need for this, foot and mouth, it's estimated, cost the UK economy last time round around £8 billion. Now, the price of tagging these sheep comes to millions. Some would say, look, that's a no-brainer.
Well, you know, I mean, let's go back to that disaster. One of the reasons it was such a disaster is we totally ignored the 1968 Northumberland report after the previous big outbreak, which said, as soon as you find foot and mouth, you kill the animals around the area and you bury them in pits of lime. Because of EU directives, we weren't even allowed to do that. So we find ourselves not really in control of our own agriculture.
But we're in the same boat as every other country. I mean, any country that has sheep farming... Why is it different?
35% of the sheep that exist in the entire European Union are in the United Kingdom. You know, we have a much, much bigger sector than the rest of Europe. And anyway, you know, we already have batch numbers. If we're moving sheep around from farm to farm, if we have an emergency, we've got all the procedures in place to stop any outbreak. And I don't think this extra cost is going to bring any benefit at all.
Well, let me bring George in on this, because you used to sit in Brussels for quite a lot of your life, in Strasbourg, so you know what goes on here. Is there sense or just power madness behind directives like
Well, listening to Nigel, and I used to listen to a lot when I was working in Brussels, you would imagine that all of this...
Not agree, though.
Well, I don't know. Occasionally I would even agree with Nigel. But you would get a sense this all madness coming out of Brussels. This is the picture that Nigel presented. This is the European Commission plan. It's absolutely mad. I'm not familiar enough with government sheep policy, I must admit, but I would imagine this is a policy which the British government has been in close consultation with the European Commission on, and which the British government actually supports. Because in my experience in Brussels, by and large, if it's a completely bonkers policy which has a detrimental effect on an important industry like the sheep industry, the British government would have stopped it. So I suspect the reason we don't hear very much from British government ministers is because they're quite happy to hide behind Brussels to implement a policy which they think is necessary.
There is an interesting facet about this, because the British government has put back the date by which this tagging ought to start by 2 years. So, I mean, that would seem to suggest that there is room for manoeuvre, room for negotiation. But again, on this principle of big old Europe pushing around...
Well, I didn't know, Anita. I sit here watching your report, and I think we live in a country where we can't regulate the banks, but we can regulate sheep. You know, I think it's one reason why people are so angry, is that, you know, talking about the banks earlier on, that's one thing you do have to regulate. This government says anything else. If you're a primary school teacher watching this programme, you've got vast numbers of targets. If you're trying to run a small business, your tax code's gone through the window. That, you know, people are getting very, very fed up with this. The government not concentrating on the regulation that matters. And in the case of foot and mouth, will this work? If it doesn't work, and it just drives farmers out of business.
But it's not the British government, is it? I mean, this is the European Commission, this is the European Union doing this, and what we're finding... I mean, I agree with your general point, but surely the form is that 75% of every new law that comes into Britain every year now comes to us from the EU.
And can I just widen this somewhat to UKIP itself, because it's good that we've got you here. We've had sort of recent electoral results which do suggest that your party, your popularity is being squeezed, and people who used to support you, either they're turning to the BNP or to the Conservative Party.
Well, so I don't think that people who have voted UKIP in the past are going to switch to the BNP. Our votes come from very different ends of the political spectrum.
Well, but you can't argue with the numbers. Your vote collapsed to less than 2% in the London Assembly elections last
Well, we
year.
had a very bad London Assembly campaign, and there's no bones about that. However, if you look at the opinion polls which say, how do you intend to vote on June the 4th, i.e. in the European elections, we're actually at this stage of the electoral cycle on double the votes we were last time round. I mean, I just take the view that if you look at the opinion polls, 2/3 of Britons now want a relationship with the EU that is based on friendship, free trade and cooperation, and not to be part of a full political union, and UKIP is the only party standing up saying it. So, you know, I'll answer that question on June the 5th, but we're going into these European elections with some degree of optimism.
And in the briefest possible way, we understand you're getting overtures from the BNP.
No, listen, this is a classic sort of BNP, let's try and get some publicity, offer UKIP a deal, we've told them where to go, we have no truck with racist or sectarian policies, and we never, ever will.
Nigel Farage, thank you very much.
To find out more about who we are and what we stand for, go to the UK Independence Party website at www.ukip.org.